Hey folks, SoloGamer here, and this is going to be the first in a hopefully long series of videos to board gamers, to people interested in buying board games, playing board games, learning how to play board games, so on. What I hope to do with these videos is show you what board games I like, give a kind of like a mini review, and go play through them. A little bit about myself. I only started playing board games a couple years ago. I played board games when I was a kid, but nothing like what we're going to go over on here. I had a little bit of money to burn. I was bored with my video games. I just one day happened to be searching through Amazon, and I saw Arkham Horror behind me here, and it looked real interesting. So I looked on YouTube. I saw a couple people play the games and go over the games, and I especially want to give a shout out to the Lonesome Gamer, Watch It Played, and Dice Tower Review. They really helped me make a decision on whether or not to even get into board game with these games. I did, and I can say that I've had a lot of fun playing them for a long time now. Of course, the first board game I got was Arkham Horror. Arkham Horror is a board game that you can play solo, cooperative, 1 to 8 players, made by Fantasy Flight Games. Now, Fantasy Flight Games are the kings of the board game world. A lot of board companies publish board games, but Fantasy Flight Games is the king. And one of the reasons being is they have a ton of games out there, and Arkham Horror is what built them, if you ask me, in my opinion. Arkham Horror is the bread and butter. It was the one that really built the company up. And the one reason Fantasy Flight Games is so popular is because whether or not you like a bunch of their games, they always support them. They have stuff on the web. They have expansions out the galore with it, but it's quality and quantity. You know, when you buy something from Fantasy Flight, you're going to get a quality product. You're going to get craftsmanship. You're going to get this great art, everything. You know, when you buy a board game from Fantasy Flight Games, you're going to get your money's worth. And speaking of money's worth, when I was a kid and played board games, they were like 10 bucks. So if you're going to, when I saw these on the internet, they were like $60, $70 a pop. And that's a lot of money to spend, but it's totally worth it because you get a lot of replay value with these games, and you get a good quality product. Arkham Horror is based off the works of one of the greatest writers in American history, H.P. Lovecraft. He is like the early 1900s version of Edgar Allan Poe. He built a mythos about other gods, strange creatures, all kinds of good stuff. And H.P. Lovecraft, his works are very good. They're a little hard to read sometimes, but they're very good, and that's what Arkham Horror is based on. Arkham Horror is based on in the early 1900s, and like I said, the base game here, Arkham Horror. And when we first do our first playthrough, we're going to just play with the base game. We're not going to play any of the other expansions. I'll go over them in just a second, but eventually we're going to add an expansion to each time we play through. The second expansion to Arkham Horror is the Dunwich Horror expansion. And what this does is this adds another board, a bunch of new characters, a bunch of new cards, and new villains, and a few new game mechanics. Out of all these big board expansions, this is one that's probably my favorite. It just has a good feel to it. And I do like the whole Dunwich Horror Herald monster and everything to it. It's a really good expansion. The first of the small box expansions we have here is the King in Yellow expansion. Now, of course, this adds just new cards, no new characters, no new bad guys, but new cards, a new herald, and a new mechanic about the King in Yellow play. So, it spices up the base game to where it just makes the play just different enough for you to have several more replay values going through. Next big box expansion is the Kingsport Horror expansion, and this adds another city, a ton of new cards, new board, new bad guys, new heroes. the gameplay mechanic in this is a little different from the Dunwich Horror. It's very good, and like I said, it's just, you know, it adds a lot more to the base game. Another small box expansion we have here is the Lurker at the Threshold. And again, like the King in Yellow or the other ones, this has new cards and a new gameplay mechanic. The Lurker on the Threshold adds roving portals. You'll see that later on whenever we get to it, but it's a good little box set. Another big box expansion is the Innsmouth Horror. And this one also adds a new city, a new board, new characters, new good guys, new bad guys, new cards, some new game mechanics, and all these expansions can be played with the base game or with each other, or you can mix and match how you want. Eventually our goal is to play all the expansions one at a time, and then eventually end it to where we play all the expansions together. It's going to be a big undertaking, but hey, you're going to see how it's done. The next small box expansion we have is Curse of the Dark Pharaoh. Now this is probably my favorite small box expansion. New cards, new gameplay mechanic about the moving, I guess, museum exhibit of the Dark Pharaoh. Like I said, this is my favorite small box expansion. Oh, they're all good. I just happen to have a personal favorite, and this one I like the best. Very worth it if you can get it. Next big box expansion is the Miskatonic Horror expansion. Now this is different from the other ones. This does not have a new board, no new characters. It basically is a bunch of new cards in which they are expansions for the expansions. They just add a ton more new cards for all the expansions, and a few new little game mechanics, mainly organizations and stuff like that. If you were going to buy all the Arkham Horror stuff, I would get this one last. It's worth it though to get it. It does add a ton of new cards, and it makes the replay value so much more. And the last expansion here, I guess you would call it the Black Stepchild, or the Black Sheep of the family, is the Black Goat of the Woods. A lot of people think this expansion is probably the least of all the expansions. I tend to agree with them. It just adds new cards and a new gameplay mechanic. The problem with this is that the gameplay mechanic tends not to come and play as much as the other ones, and so it gets kind of a little bit of a bad rap. But hey, it's worth getting. It's good, just not as good as the other ones. You know, one of them had to be the bad sheep of the family, and this one was it. But I still would recommend getting it. What I want to do is we're going to play the base game. I'm going to show you. I'm going to get it set up. We're going to show you how setup appears. We're going to show you what it looks like. We're going to go over the rules, and we're going to play. And then each time we're going to play, we're going to add a new expansion, like I said. And then we're going to add eventually to where we get all the expansions put in together. Just a word on Arkham Horror. Like I said, this was my first board game to get into foray. If you're all board gamers worth their salt, have this or have played this. This is, you know, several years old, but it's still going strong. Especially if you love the horror theme, you can't beat this. If you were going to get into board games, I would recommend getting Arkham Horror. And the rules on these games are a little complex, to say the least. But if you can understand the rules on these games, and you can play any other games out there. Excuse me. And that's what I hope to do with the Arkham Horror series. Eventually we'll move on to other board games, and but let's get it set up and we can start to play when we get back.